What does a museum hold? This is a lesson plan for creating a museum box. Throughout this lesson, we will consider the significance and the role of museums in our culture and in society. And then we will create our own museum boxes to preserve art or artifacts that we find significant. Oftentimes we think of museums as big, heavy stone buildings with large pillars in the front, and they are places where we just go with our hands behind our backs and can't really touch anything and just look around. But what is a museum really? Isn't it really a place to learn about history and art and artifacts and to engage ourselves and be inspired to create on our own? The definition of a museum is a building in which objects of historical, scientific, artistic, or cultural interest are stored and exhibited. But a museum also protects art and artifacts. It educates those who visit, and it inspires us to be creative ourselves. When we think about a museum, we have to think about who works in a museum. And there are both volunteers and employees, people who actually get paid to work there. There are often board of directors, there are curators, there are museum guards, there's ticket takers, there's retail clerks at the gift shop, there's cashiers, and there's docents who give tours. The New York State standards that we will be visiting include defining the roles and responsibilities of a curator, explaining the skills and knowledge needed in preserving, maintaining, and presenting objects, artifacts, and artwork. We will also be able to cite evidence about how an exhibition in a museum or other venue presents ideas and provides information about a specific concept or topic once we've completed this lesson. During this lesson, our primary goal is for students to gain a better understanding of how objects, artifacts, and artworks are collected, preserved, and presented, and that they communicate a special meaning or a function as a record of social, cultural, and political experiences. The result is the cultivation and appreciation of understanding of our past and of our creative efforts. When we think about the role of museums, we have to think about how are the artworks cared for and by whom? What is the function of art museums, galleries, and other venues that display artwork? Are they to just hold them and keep them under lock and key, or are museums supposed to allow the public to see those things? Why do people value objects, artifacts, and artwork and select them for presentation or preservation? As we think about why do museums have certain things on display, I want you also to think about what you really love and what you would have in your own museum someday. And then we want to think about what criteria and methods are used to select work for preservation and presentation. Why would certain things be on display, and how would we make a secure exhibit of those items? Some things are very heavy, some things are very tiny, some things are really precious and rare and fragile, and then some things are much more adept to being touched and looked at and surrounded. So there are all sorts of things that could be on display at a museum and all sorts of ways to exhibit them. And then we have to think about how do objects, artifacts, and artwork that is collected and preserved or presented cultivate appreciation and understanding? How do those things in the museum actually help educate us, help expand our knowledge of culture, of society, of the past, of our future? What role does a museum play in how we think about our own worlds? And last but certainly not least, how does the presenting and sharing of objects, artifacts, and artwork influence and shape ideas, our beliefs, and our experiences? Do museums help us relate to other people? Do museums help us think deeper about our own cultural beliefs and our own artistic expression? And with any lesson, there's new vocabulary words to learn, and you may know some of these already, but we are going to talk about artifacts, curators, docents, conservation, presentation, and preservation. These are all museum-related terms, And on the vocabulary sheets that you have, I'd like you to write out the definitions of these in your own words. So first of all, we're going to talk about artifacts. Artifacts are objects made by a human being, typically one of cultural or historical interest. So artifacts can be ancient or they can be modern, but they're handmade. A curator is a keeper or custodian of a museum or other collection. A curator is in charge of the objects in a museum. The curator might keep track of those things, might catalog them, might put them on display. There are many roles of a curator. A docent is kind of a fancy word for a tour guide. So a docent is a person who acts as a guide, typically on a voluntary basis, in a museum, art gallery, or zoo. Conservation is a term used related to preservation and repair of archaeological, historical, and cultural sites and artifacts. Conservation is when someone repairs something or helps further protect it from damage. Presentation is the manner or style in which something is given, offered, or displayed. Presentation is how we exhibit things, how we show things. And preservation is the means to maintain something in its original or existing state. How do we keep something perfect just the way it was? And sometimes that is by putting it under glass. Sometimes it is putting it in a special case or out of reach of people touching it. Or if it's something to be looked at, maybe like an old book, maybe people would have to use gloves when they were opening the pages. So preservation is an important aspect of a museum. Now I want you to think back about your experiences in a museum. Where was your first museum visit? Was it at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York? Was it at a smaller local museum such as the Everson Museum? Or was it at Cooperstown, the Fenimore Cooper House, or the Farmers Museum? And then what is your favorite museum experience? What things did you do while you were at the museum? Did you create things? Did you get to look at big artwork? Did you get to look at big sculptures you had never experienced before? Or did you spend a lot of time in the room that had ancient Egyptian artifacts? What is your favorite museum experience? And we're going to take a minute now to ask if anybody would like to share their favorite museum experiences. Sometimes museums can be little. They can be in someone's home. They can be in someone's room. Or they might be huge, as in the Louvre in Paris or the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Have you ever heard of the Wizard of Oz Museum? Have you ever heard of the Museum of Bad Art? Those are real museums, and they have real art and artifacts and collectibles in those museums, and they're certainly worth a visit. Just because a sign on the building says it's a museum doesn't mean it has to be filled with fancy or expensive art. We're going to watch this almost 9-minute video called The Case for Museums. And it's a fabulous discussion about why museums are so important. So let's take a little break and watch this video. As you can see from that video, museums can store and exhibit all kinds of art, artifacts, and cultural objects. There's so many reasons that museums are so important for us to visit, and for us to know that things are safe and protected for the future. So what type of museum would you like to visit? If you were to create a museum, what would you have in your collection? As you think about a museum that you would love, what art or artifacts would you exhibit and store in your museum? That is the key to this project that we are going to be working on when we create our own museum boxes? Would you exhibit Native American tools? Would you exhibit oil paintings? How about your own family photographs or unique black and white photographs from the past? Would you have gold coins? Maybe an exhibit of pirates or treasures? Would you have sculptures in your gallery? Would you exhibit pottery or weavings? Would your museum be filled with your own original art? Or would you have some other really unique collection? Tonight, when you go home, I want you to think about what you would have in your museum and collect a few items or make a plan to replicate items you would have in your own museum. And the museums that we are going to create are box sized, so something that would fit on top of a desk. They could be really tiny if you want, they could be a little bit bigger, but just think about what you're going to put into a box. So if your sculpture or something that you would love in a museum is really big, you're going to need to recreate it either as a picture or a smaller model. So you can make miniatures of those items that you would love to exhibit if they happen in real life to be huge. And if you're doing artwork, if you would like to have a whole museum just of Vincent van Gogh's work, then you can make copies, replicas of the paintings that you would have in your museum. So tonight, again, I'd like you to think about what you'd have in your museum. And if your museum is going to be about sharks and you have shark teeth at home, you want to bring those in. So I'd like you to have a few items that you could display, again, either as replicas or as actual small things within the museum. In our next class, we're going to design unique museum boxes to hold those special items that you've collected or designed. And you're going to have to think about what size and shape box will you use and how will you decorate your box inside and out. I'll have some boxes available for you. If you have a box at home you'd like to bring in, that would be wonderful. I'm thinking cardboard boxes, but they can be handmade boxes. You can make them out of paper, out of cardstock, out of cardboard. Additionally, you could have boxes that are tin or wood. So I want you to think about the size and shape of your box, depending on what you're going to put in it, and then how are you going to decorate the box inside and out. And again, consider what is needed to protect the artifacts or artwork that is going to be on display in your box. What will be needed to display the art or artifacts in the box? Will they just be loose in the box? Will you have them glued to the edges of the box? Will you have a little platform? You know, if you're going to have three-dimensional pieces, are they going to be glued to the bottom or will you be able to take them out? So think about the display within the box. And again, how will the inside and the outside look? Is it going to look like a building on the outside and then look like a museum with walls painted and decorated on the inside? Or is it going to be something totally different? Is the museum supposed to be an outdoor sculpture garden and you're going to have grass and sky on the outside and then you're going to have the sculptures again with a natural look on the inside? Or something totally different? But then again, I want you to think about how will others recognize the significance of the art and artifacts. I want you to think about something special so that it is significant to you, important to you, something that you would have in a museum if you were able to have your own museum. And then we will be designing the museum box by drawing a sketch, making a draft of the inside and outside sections of a box. Boxes are six-sided, so you're going to need to think about what's going to be on the top, how's the lid going to open, and then what's going to be on the other sides. And perhaps the bottom will never be looked at, so you don't have to do any decorations on the very bottom of your box. But you might want to think about the inside lid as being part of your exhibit space. So there's a lot of different components with the inside and outside of the box. And here's a few examples. Again, is the outside of your box going to look like a museum? Or are you going to have images of yourself as you go through a museum? And then maybe you're going to use collage techniques, or you're going to use paint. What are you going to use to actually cover the box? And once we're all finished, we are going to set up a museum walk. And each of us is going to have a space in the room. We'll set up a display where we can walk along and look at all the different museum boxes as if we were going on a tour through the city museum district. And each student will stand beside his or her box and give a talk as the docent, give a tour of that box. What is inside the box, and why did you choose those things, and why did you choose to decorate as you did? The final assessment, the grades, will be based on a rubric, and we will consider your actual final design. Did you incorporate the elements of design? Did you think about your presentation and give a thorough description of your box and the artifacts? And how did you participate in the class? Were you respectful of others as they were giving their presentations? I'm really excited about this museum box lesson plan, and I can't wait to see how all of you create and then exhibit your museum boxes.